Hello, and welcome to my podcast. My name is James, and I am your host. I'm an astrologer, an accountant, software developer, and a student of history. I love to learn. I've been a curious person all my life, and I am trying to put that curiosity to explore the world via astrology, mostly with this podcast. So in this podcast, we're going to be learning and looking at a lot of astrology. We're going to be looking at life, history, economics, politics, current events, people, psychology, relationships, sexuality, pretty much anything that the curious mind can lead us to. Ultimately, because this is an astrology podcast, we're going to be doing it through the lens of astrology. And the way that I've tended to look at astrology is very cyclical. Obviously, it's a study of cycles. Right? It's based on the cyclical movements of planets in the sky. And so we're going to look at things through that lens. Where are we in different cycles? How do we understand these cycles? What do they mean for us on a personal level or a societal level? And so we're going to look at a whole lot of things. Like I said, it's going to be wherever our curiosity takes us. Now, as for myself, just a little about me, because obviously it's always, a little maybe hesitation to trust a random person on the internet as far as what they're talking about. I grew up, honestly, not anything close to astrology, not an esoteric family at all. Grew up very religious, conservative, Republican family out here in California. And I'm a math and science guy. I have been my whole life. I've always been very good at math, very in tune with data. I like to look at things. I'm very logical. And I like to make sure stuff makes sense conceptually, intellectually, practically. And so that's kind of how I've approached a lot of my life. But at some point over the course of my 20s, I began to realize and have experiences that kind of challenged some of those beliefs. And began to broaden my horizons quite a bit. Now, I've always been a bit more open-minded than most of the rest of my family, mostly out of curiosity. Why do things work the way they do? That's always been a question that I've asked about pretty much everything. Why is this that way? Why does that happen? What caused that to happen? What's the reason behind it? What's the underlying, issue? How are these things related? I always ask these questions, and so that's the way I approach everything I learn about, and which is going to be the way we approach this podcast in many ways. Why are things the way that they are? Now, I at some point I read the book, The Fourth Turning, by Strauss and Howe. For those who haven't read it, it's a pretty interesting book, honestly. It kind of talks about generational cycles. It's not an astrology book. It's a book written by two sociologists. And it discusses how there are essentially four generations that all experience four different climates, if you will, from a cultural, political perspective. And during each of these climates, or turnings as they'd call them, each generation will experience them at a different age. And the age that each generation experiences them at will kind of resonate with previous and future turnings. So, for instance, the book is called The Fourth Turning because some point in the early mid-2000s, the author has since stated he thinks it began in 2008 with the global financial crash. We entered the fourth turning. And so the fourth turning will have a lot of same themes, a lot of same experiences for the people of each generation at their current age as the prior fourth turning, which would have been the Great Depression and World War II. And so it's an interesting book. It really got me kind of thinking in this more cyclical pattern that we see in history, that we see in other things. And so when everything happened post-COVID, with the PPP loans and all of the craziness that went on, that book kind of really resonated with me. And something my wife had said to me many years ago was that the 2020s were going to be crazy. That's what all the astrologers are saying. Obviously, as somebody who's not woo-woo, not into esoteric stuff, at the time I didn't pay it much mind. and just kind of, blew it off as just a casual comment or whatever. Didn't really have any meaning. But then that comment kind of came back to my memory as I began watching the second half of 2020 unfold. And it really stuck out to me. And so I got curious, and I started looking into things and kind of mapping things out. Some of the ideas that I'd had, the theories that I had as far as where we were headed politically, economically, I started to investigate. I started to look into them, kind of hash out my own thoughts on things. But even more than that, I got curious and went on YouTube and just Googled, astrologers, 2020s or whatever, and saw what I saw. And sure enough, I ran into several videos that, different perspectives on how crazy and turbulent the 20s were going to be. I found this Indian astrologer, and he was the one who ultimately really kind of impressed me and hooked me on this thing that really so accurately displayed what had happened and what was going to happen, broad strokes level, I think. But it still was far more accurate than I ever expected it could have been. And so that made me begin to question. And so I began looking into it and doing more research, checking out more videos online, reading more things, everything I could Google. And obviously, as one does, as you begin your journey into astrology, you look up your birth chart. And that was mind-blowing. Seeing how well it described myself, seeing how well it showed some of the issues I had been facing, some of the things I had been going through. Really, truly, it put me in a new direction. And so from that point forward, I really began to study it in earnest because I thought, how can this be? This can't make sense. There's no way this can be true. Because, like I said, I'm a logical person, practical, and I kind of grew up in this very rigid mindset that I was, over time, over my 20s, had been slowly kind of branching out from. And this was kind of a new deviation. And so over the last several years, I've been studying astrology, privately at first, on my own time, reading books, practicing charts, reading for friends. And then from there, I found a mentor who, for any who are interested, I would highly recommend. She's a fantastic astrologer. Her name is Susan Hopkinson. She is excellent. Really, really mind-blowing reading with her the first time I met her. But she is truly incredible, and she had a massive impact on how I look at things. She takes a very familial perspective, looking at what we can see of our parents within our own birth chart. Because at the end of the day, our birth chart is just a transit chart for our parents. And so I took what I learned from her, what I learned from my own studies, and really have now fleshed out kind of my own methodology, my own style, if you will. And so I began to do astrology and really begin to study things. Now, I have a financial background. I've worked in accounting for about 10 years. I studied computer science, obviously not really super related, but I have been slowly trying to break into that field. I think when I graduated and we had kids, kind of screwed up my transition a little bit in terms of the timeline, but still working on it. So I have a background that's very money intensive, very technical intensive. And I think that approach is how I kind of look at things. And so for this podcast, what does that mean? It means I'm going to be coming from a place that is not your typical woo-woo esoteric mindset, because I didn't grow up with it at all. This podcast can be a bit more real, a bit more honest. And we're going to look at things from a very in-depth and technical perspective to the best that I can. And again, it's all founded on my own curiosity for the world and for learning and what we can see and what we can understand and why things are the way they are. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this podcast. We're going to really try to dive into why things happen, why they mean, what they're about. And there may be times where we have to cover just the who, what, when, and where before we can get to the why. But the general gist of it is going to be good going through stuff like that. So if you've followed along this far, I appreciate it. I appreciate you listening. There will be many wonderful podcasts to come where like I said, we're going to dive into a whole plethora of topics. I think our next episode, we will probably start very basic and work our way from there, looking at the big three. So thanks again for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.